So I've got to start with the thing that brings us here today, because I've got to say it is unusual for somebody who is as high up in the Republican leadership as Liz Cheney was to be out here campaigning with the Democratic nominee for president. And so maybe why don't both of you tell us, but you start. You've actually marshaled unprecedented support from Republicans in this election. Why do you think that is?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for being here and for your work. And the Congresswoman, thank you. I have said before, and it must be repeated each time, there are moments in the history of our country which challenge us, each of us, to really decide, do we stand for those things that we talk about, including a particular country over party. And you have been extraordinarily courageous in the way that you have done that, and I thank you for that. So, you know, I have, in my career now, whether it was as the elected district attorney, elected attorney general, and then elected United States senator, and of course now vice president, I've counted that I have taken the oath of office 6 times. And for the elected leaders here, we know it is an oath that one must take sincerely and unequivocally, which is an oath, among other things, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and to understand what those principles represent and what they require of the individual who holds the office in the public trust. And let's not undervalue that point as well. It is not about the individual. It is not about what is in their personal interest. It is about what is for and in the spirit of the public good. And this is a moment in this election that presents a real contrast among how I, as one of the 2 nominees, and my opponent, the former president, think of that duty. And it is a duty, by the way. There are certain things in our lives that we have the choice if we feel like it. And then there are certain things that are just fundamentally a duty, like to raise our children, things of that nature. It is a duty to take seriously that oath and do it for the sake of the public good and in the public trust. And I think that this moment, with the choice that the American people have in this election in 2 weeks and 1 day, this election is presenting, for the first time probably in certainly recent history, a very clear choice and difference between the 2 nominees. And I think that is what, as much as anything, is bringing us as Americans together, who are understanding that we cannot, with such fundamental stakes being presented, afford to be mired in ideological differences without really staking our claim to the most fundamental ideals upon which our country stands.
Thank you. And, you know, Congresswoman Cheney, it's sort of the same question to you, but I got to ask, you know, it's one thing for Republicans to sign a letter. You know, we've seen that Vice President Harris has been endorsed by 200 Republicans in the national security space, all kinds of people from George W. Bush's administration. There's been a lot of people, they'll sign letters and then maybe they'll go on TV, they'll release a statement. I was just with Republican Congressman Charlie Dent, former Republican congressman here from the state. He voted for you in his early voting. But you are out here campaigning. You are out here holding events. So talk about why it's been so important to you to be as involved as you are in getting Vice President Harris elected.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for the question, and it's an honor to be here today with you, Madam Vice President. You know, for me, every single thing in my experience and in my background has played a part in my decision to endorse Vice President Harris. And you know, that begins with the fact that I'm a conservative. And I know that the most conservative of all conservative principles is being faithful to the Constitution. And you have to choose in this race between someone who has been faithful to the Constitution, who will be faithful, and Donald Trump, who it's not just us predicting how he will act. We watched what he did after the last election. We watched what he did on January 6th. And so coming to this as someone who's been a lifelong Republican, a lifelong conservative, also as someone I spent time working overseas before I was elected to Congress, and I've spent time working in countries where people aren't free and where people are struggling for their freedom, and I know how quickly democracies can unravel. And I know that as Americans, we can become accustomed to thinking, well, we don't have to worry about that here. But I tell you, again, as someone who has seen firsthand how quickly it can happen, that is what's on the ballot. It's absolutely what's on the ballot. I also, I come to this decision as a mother. I have 5 children. And there was a moment right after January 6th when my husband and I were having dinner with our 2 youngest, our 2 sons. And I looked across the table at my young sons, and I thought to myself, you know, in the aftermath of the attack on the Capitol, are they going to grow up in a country where we don't have to worry about the peaceful transfer of power? Are they going to grow up in a country where that is guaranteed? And I believe that every one of us in this election has a duty and an obligation to do what we know is right for the country, and that's to support Vice President Harris. So I'm very honored to be here and to do that.
You know, if I can just echo the Congresswoman's point. So I've now, as Vice President, met over 150 world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, and kings, many of them multiple times, to the point we're on a first-name basis. And the last few times I've seen them in the relative eve of this election, they are very concerned, our allies. Because, as you know, when we walk in those rooms around the world representing the United States of America, we have traditionally been able to walk in those rooms, chin up, shoulders back, with the self-appointed and earned authority to talk about the importance of democracies and rule of law. But as all the role models here know, as a role model, people watch what you do to see if it lines up with what you say. People around the world are watching this. And I tell you, sometimes I do fret a bit about whether we as Americans truly understand how important we are to the world. I hope everyone does really understand that we represent something, imperfect though we certainly are, flawed though we may be. We represent, in terms of our ideals, the basis of our Constitution, we represent a gold standard. And when we have someone who has been president, who wants to be president again, who is saying he would be dictator on day one, would weaponize our Department of Justice, one of the principles of our democracy is that we say we have a justice system that is blind, that is not punitive against one's enemies. They are watching. So this is about direct impact on the American people, and it most certainly will impact people around the world.
You know, I'm so glad you brought that up. And I as a follow-up, I would just ask Congresswoman Cheney, too, we live in a dangerous time. I mean, I think Americans are watching what's happening overseas, in Ukraine, in Israel. Republicans, we used to be the party that would be on the side of our Democratic allies like Ukraine. Talk to me a little bit, and all of us, about why, from a foreign policy standpoint, you find yourself able to endorse Democrats who didn't used to be that way.
Well, it's not just able to endorse them, but if you look at the numbers of the most senior officials who served Donald Trump, his own vice president, national security advisors, as chief of staff, the leading generals who served him, who've all said he's unfit. And people really need to stop and think about how completely unprecedented that is. And the idea, when people sort of say, well, we might, be tempted for some reason or another to vote for Donald Trump. If the issue is foreign policy, I would just ask everyone, think about how dangerous and damaging it is to have someone who's totally erratic, completely unstable, someone who has aligned himself with, who idolizes tyrants. He idolizes tyrants. The choice here with respect to national security policy is a man who has proven, he's absolutely proven that he will not stand up, he won't defend this nation with respect to our own Constitution and rule of law. And Vice President Harris, who has been clear in terms of support for Ukraine, in terms of recognizing and understanding across the board that America cannot maintain our own freedom and security if we walk away from our allies around the world. And our adversaries know that they can play Donald Trump. They absolutely know that they can play him. And we simply can't afford to take that risk. So as someone who's spent a career on national security issues, again, this was not at all a difficult choice for me. The choice here is absolutely clear in terms of the necessity of supporting Vice President Harris.
And if I may emphasize, part of the backbone of our national security is our military. And let's please not overlook how someone who wants to be commander-in-chief and has talked about our servicemen and women, has talked about an American hero like John McCain, who was a prisoner of war, and said he didn't respect him, didn't like him because he got caught, has talked about our service members as though they are less than the most courageous of us, those who put on the uniform, who represent the United States of America, who are willing to die for the sake of everything we stand for. And he calls them suckers and losers. These things cannot be overlooked. And I have said many times publicly, and I'll say it again, in many, many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of him being president of the United States are brutally serious. There are things that he says that will be the subject of skits and laughter and jokes. But words have meaning coming from someone who aspires to stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. These are the things that are at stake.
As the Vice President was speaking with Liz Cheney, I just looked up Chester County, which is where they are, one of those key 4 collar counties around Philadelphia. In the 2024, in this cycle's primary, Nikki Haley got 9,338 votes. She was not in the race anymore. So that's just one data point of the kind of Republican voter that they can try to appeal to vote for Kamala Harris, because those were almost 10,000 voters who were absolutely voting to protest Donald Trump.
You can definitely see, and it's not just demographic, right? It's also geographical, and that's why she is in these suburban areas of the Blue Wall states in making this pitch. So the places she is with Liz Cheney today, it's Philadelphia, it's suburban Philadelphia, and then she's going to be also in suburban areas in Michigan and Wisconsin, because there's a feeling among Democrats that Trump has left a lot of these votes on the table because of the type of campaign that he is running this year, right? You have Trump trying to drive up his numbers with those base groups and with the disaffected voters that he believes he can bring in off the sidelines, trying to drive up his margins in rural areas like where he is today. And so she is trying to gather some of those swing voters, the educated former Republicans, particularly, college-educated, upper middle class women in a lot of these suburbs. The idea being that while these are the groups that Democrats have made steady gains with over the past several cycles, there's still more that she can be doing to maximize her vote share there.
And you were with the Vice President as she was campaigning this weekend.
I was, and when you talk to the campaign, they never viewed this as a base election. They argue that every campaign needs some voters from the other side, and making this argument to those voters that the former president is fundamentally unfit, he's unhinged, it's a much different argument than agreeing with her on every policy matter. I met a woman in Wisconsin. The state is arguably pretty evenly split. And she told me she was excited to be at the Green Bay rally, but she's still working on convincing some of her Republican colleagues and neighbors. And so that is why they are leaning on this message so hard. They will argue it's not at the expense of messaging to the base. She had Souls to the Polls events this weekend targeting black voters, but it's a both-and strategy.